Hello and welcome to Into the Woods with Holly Wharton. This podcast is all about our journey into the woods of ourselves, getting to know who we are, where we are, and where we're going in life so that we can create the life that we want to live. It's about deepening your connection with yourself, taking inspired action, and really trusting yourself and your intuition. It's also about mindset. Our beliefs are such an important part of this journey, and there are so many ways for us to change our mindset so that we can more easily live a life of expansive joy. This podcast is also about going literally into the woods and spending time in nature, and how that can help us on our own personal journey of self-knowledge. Thank you so much for joining us today. Now let's get into this week's episode. Hello, adventurers! Welcome to the Into the Woods podcast, episode 381. This is your host, Holly Wharton, and I'm back with another guest. This week, I'm super excited to introduce this week's guest, Helen Forrester. I was inspired to invite her on the show by one of her recent Instagram posts about nature and creative blocks. Now, nature is fantastic at helping me to relax, get into flow, and get back in touch with my creativity. So I wanted to be sure to touch on this topic for the podcast. Helen Forrester is the founder and presenter of the podcast Prompted by Nature. She lives, works, and creates in Hove, UK. She's usually to be found wandering the forests and seasides of the South Coast and South Downs with her two small children, as well as guiding, writing, and meditation groups in her local woodlands and natural spaces. Helen worked as an English teacher for 10 years in South London, Sussex, and Spain. And she's a qualified yoga and meditation teacher, taking inspiration from each of these specialisms to create everything you see in her work at Prompted by Nature. She's dedicated to making nature writing and meditation accessible to all, helping to connect you with your own creativity and voice using nature as your prompt by creating safe spaces for wandering and creating. Her Instagram feed is dedicated to nature-inspired writing prompts that help you gain confidence in your own creative voice and connect to nature around you in a more profound way. In her spare time, Helen runs a local community conservation group caring for and protecting a local green space. So what are you going to learn in this week's episode? We talk about what are creative blocks. How can you tell when you've got a creative block? How do you know when you're stuck? Possible causes of creative blocks. Helen's top tips for getting outdoors and into nature to help us get past our creative blocks. And finally, how nature can help with creative flow. I really hope you enjoy this week's episode. As you know, nature is very important to me. Expressing myself creatively is also important to me. And so I love how Helen brings together the two of them to help people express themselves creatively through getting out into nature. This is really a topic that's very, very close to my heart. But before we get into this week's episode, I wanted to say thank you to new patron Joanna Penn. Thank you so much for supporting me on Patreon. And if you would like to join me on Patreon, you can head over to patreon.com/Holly Wharton and join me there. Membership starts at just $1 a month and you get exclusive access to stuff I don't share anywhere else. So without further ado, let's get into this week's episode. Hello, Helen.
Hi.
How are you doing today?
Yeah, I'm good.
Good. I'm really looking forward to our conversation here.
Yeah, me too. It's my first podcast interview where I'm not the one doing the interviewing.
Oh, how exciting.
Yeah. I'm a bit like, I'm allowed to talk in this one.
You are allowed to talk, yes. So I wanted to talk to you because of this Instagram post that you posted about creative blocks and nature and how nature can help us with creative blocks. And the second I saw that, I was like, oh, this is really juicy. So before we get into the actual topic, I wanted to talk to you about nature and your relationship with nature. So how do you like to get outdoors and get into nature? What's your outdoor adventure or activity of choice?
Most of the time I run or I'm on my bike. I've always been a very active outdoor person, like from when I was very, very young, and then kind of all through my teens, I was very active. I was a rower and I used to do a lot of running and stuff. And that's kind of always had a knock-on effect with my adult life. And right now, obviously with everything as it is, it's more like before it was just like, I'd go for a few runs and it would just be something that I did. It's just something I've always done because I just enjoy it. And then I realized during lockdown that actually it was something I had to do. And so for me right now, I have to say, more than ever, I'm really enjoying being on my bike. And I've done a lot. Like, I did the London to Brighton a few years ago. So it was pre-baby. So it was like 2012, I think. And I absolutely loved it. But I wasn't really a cyclist. It was more I would run and then do some yoga. And then the cycling was just what I did to get to and from places. And then I did the London to Brighton and it was like, oh, wow, just this freedom about being on your bike, isn't there? And then I think with everything that's happened this year and having the children around a lot more, which has been lovely, but it's been more, I think I've needed that sense of freedom that you get on your bike that you get when you're running. But I think there's something about being able to go fast, your own steam, that you can't go that fast when you're running. Well, I can't anyway.
No, neither can I. I'm not a fast runner.
Yeah. I think other than kind of getting out into the forest with the kids and stuff, I think just being outside on my bike is really, and I live near the South Downs, so it takes like 5 minutes to cycle up to the South Downs and then it's just hills. So that's been really, really nice way of feeling adventurous, even though it's not like what I would really love to do, which is like just disappear into the Scottish Highlands and not come back for a few weeks. But it's kind of, So at the moment, I'm really, really loving my bike. Yeah.
Excellent. So how did you go from riding your bike as a means of transportation to signing up to the London to Brighton? Because that's a big leap.
Yeah, I didn't really consider it as a big leap until I actually did it. And actually, I think because I was always on my bike as a child, and I was always outside playing generally with the boys in the neighbourhood, because they would always go outside and they'd always be playing football and climbing trees. And that was what I liked doing. So we would go out on our bikes and cycle up and down the road and stuff. And it was for fun. And then I went to uni and, it was before that actually. I started rowing when I was 13. And then it was just, like I say, to and from. Same thing when I went to uni. And it was really at uni, I think, when cycling, our coach would build it into part of our training. And so it was like another way to build the muscles in our legs and build endurance and stuff like that. But I still didn't really appreciate it. And then I think it was, I think actually it might have been, I did the London Marathon in 2010 and I did not have a good experience and it put me off running for a really long time. And it was my own silly fault. I went off too fast. I did a half marathon PB in the London Marathon. Like, you don't do, it's not how it works. So I think after that, I just kind of didn't want to run again for a bit. So again, I was like cycling to and from yoga and like I was a teacher at the time and school and stuff. And then it was like, I might just start doing this because I lived in London at the time as just something to do and enjoy. And my mum, we lived in southeast London and my mum was in Kingston upon Thames. So I would cycle we lived kind of near Peckham Rye, from there to her. And I would just do that kind of for fun. And I was like, oh my God, I can cycle this far. That's amazing. And then I can't remember who suggested it first, but either myself or my partner said, shall we do the London to Brighton? And we both signed up for it together and did it together. And we started doing like spinning and all of that sort of stuff. And I think it was that period, probably from about, 2010, 11 to London to Brighton and then beyond. And that was when it became something where I would be like, I'm just going to go out on my bike for an hour. Or I'm just going to go out on the bike for the morning or something. And now actually my world has got a lot smaller because I don't have to go to work every day, as in I work from home. I'm not a teacher anymore, as in a school teacher. So I work from home. My kids go to school, which is a 5-minute walk from our house. So now I don't have commuting as a reason to be on my bike. And it's become just something I do for pleasure and for exercise, but I think more just to kind of feel the wind.
That's really, really lovely. I think a lot of people have kind of reconnected with nature and reconnected with moving their bodies outdoors as a result of this lockdown. And now, of course, we're going into another lockdown in a couple of days. So I think it's really helped people forge a connection with the outdoors that they had before. And I love that. Like, at first, it was kind of a shock to go out into all the trails that I usually go on and see all these people when I wasn't used to seeing all these people. But it also made me really happy to see more people outdoors.
Oh, definitely. And that's really been the case here as well. We have a local green space near us. And I've taken the kids over there a few times, but it was really during lockdown that we started using it more. And there's like a little bit of woodland, there's an open space. And unfortunately, it's under threat of part of it might be developed, but I've set up like a local project to try and help at least work with whatever they decide to do so that we can still consider nature. But what I noticed was, like you say, we were going there almost every day and we were doing the wildlife trust, did so much stuff. It was amazing. And like we were doing butterfly hunts and all of this sort of stuff, ticking on a little sheet. And the amount of people who were going there was increasing as the weeks went on. And you would see people not just with their dogs, you would see people out with their families, similar to me, like a mum with their kids or mum and dad or parents with their kids, people out for a walk by themselves, which always makes me so happy because even if you're walking from one place to another, just the fact that you're by yourself in a space that actually part of it you don't have to walk in because it's not a cut through to anything. You literally just are there just to enjoy it. So yeah, that always makes me really happy. But like you say, you don't ever want to be like, this is my space. But it's like, oh wow, all of these people are discovering what I have known for a while. And it's really wonderful, actually, because the more people that feel that connection with nature, I hope the more people that will help protect it.
Oh my God, you sound like me. I could have said that. I 100% agree with that. Absolutely. So what have you learned about yourself through your connection with nature over the years?
I think the biggest thing is trust, that I can trust myself in a kind of, not just, I don't know how to put it, but by trusting nature, I have learnt to trust myself, and also self-confidence and kind of building that resilience to know, okay, obstacles will come up, but I can get through them. And I think, I don't know if that's kind of come about from having been outside for most of my life, but I know that, like, for example, like going out when I was a kid and I would row and we'd be going out on the water at like 6:30 in the morning and you would literally be like cutting through ice with your boat because it was so cold. But that resilience of like, yes, it's really cold, but I'll be okay because I know I'm going to walk, like this won't last. That idea of like, this too shall pass, everything. And that's, I think the biggest teaching of nature for me is that everything passes. Every season changes and every season in our life will pass and change, whether that's a good thing or not. The good things won't last and the bad things won't last. And actually that's reassuring. And when I left uni, I worked very, very hard for a year and then I took myself off traveling. I went to Mexico, Central and South America. I deliberately went by myself and I had, a couple of friends were like, oh, I'm going to go to Australia. Do you want to come? Or I'm going to go and do this gap year project. Do you want to come? And I was like, no and no. And it's not that I have anything against going to Australia or doing a gap year project, but I very much knew I needed to do something by myself and almost like step into what I already knew I was, that I had to kind of almost like ignore while I was at school. I don't know, maybe it was ignoring it or just not being confident enough to step into it. And then when I went traveling, so much of it was nature. So much of it was me stumbling upon a little village somewhere and being totally taken in by the people there, like climbing a volcano and seeing the sunrise at like 4:30 in the morning from the top of it. And you're standing at the top and you're seeing the shadow of the volcano in front of you because the sun's behind you. And I remember the biggest thing that I learned that nature taught me about being able to trust myself. I have this really vivid memory. I went to, I think it was such a long time ago now. It's like kind of all the names fade, but I think it was in Nicaragua. It was somewhere there and there was a cloud rainforest. I really hope it's still there. It's one of those things now when I look back, I'm like, God, what's there? I hope everything's still there because I don't know.
Well, Costa Rica's actually done a good job of expanding their rainforests. So I lived in Costa Rica in 1996 for a few months. And I think in the 1950s, they started protecting the rainforests and giving more space to them. And even since I lived there in the mid-90s, they've grown their rainforest and their cloud forest even more. So there is good news in some parts of the world.
That makes me happy. But there was this cloud rainforest. So a cloud rainforest is basically a rainforest that's up a mountain. So you're literally going up into the clouds. And there was no path. I don't know if there is now. I would hope so because I got lost. There was no path. The only way you could get to the top where there was like a hut was following these ribbons. And that was literally it. And this was 2004, 2004-5 I went away. And I followed this trail, and I was so nervous because I was like, what if I get it wrong? I don't have a map. There were all these stories about like people getting lost in the rainforest and stuff. But something in me, I don't know what happened when I went away, but it was almost like my intuition and my gut, my instinct got turned up a notch. Yep. And it was almost like something, I actually honestly believe it was nature. She was like, you're going to need your instinct. So I'm just going to turn it up. I'm going to turn the volume up on it a bit because you need to start listening to it more because it's always been right. And now you need to learn to trust it. And I remember I got to this point and there was a little wooden sign and it said waterfall this way, but it was taking me off the track. And I was like, oh, I'd love to see it. I've heard about it. And I thought, well, if I can like go and like retrace my steps and then I'll be okay. Anyway, I went to see this waterfall and it was totally worth it. It was amazing. And then I came back and I lost my path and I ended up falling down the side. Oh. I fell down the side of this. I've never told my mum this. I fell down the side of this mountain, not all the way, obviously. It was only a short part. And I skidded to a halt, like right in front of this cobweb with this massive spider in it. And I was just like, I screamed and then ran back up to where it was. And because I could follow where I'd fallen, I got back up to the bit where I had kind of slid. And I just remember calming myself. This was before I was practicing meditation or anything like that. I just remember closing my eyes, stopping, breathing, and then just thinking, right, what do I remember seeing? And then just started almost like retracing my steps in very, and just going really, really slowly. And eventually I found my way onto the path. And I think experiences like that, I mean, I was 22 when that happened. And I think that had such a massive impact on my self-confidence hugely, because I was quite shy when I was at school. I had a really lovely group of friends who I felt very, very comfortable with. But when I went outside of my friendship group, I was very shy. And so that taught me so much about, like I said, like just knowing that I would be okay, trusting that I could get myself out of difficult situations, and then kind of on a broader scale, like actually just being around people I didn't know and that it was okay, you know, that kind of, but I think so much of the way that I see myself now comes from something that I've learned from being outside. So I think, that's the biggest thing, I think.
Solo travel is so fantastic for teaching us how to trust ourselves, how to trust our intuition, confidence, self-esteem. Like, I'm such a fan of solo travel.
Same.
It's just, it's really life-changing. It absolutely changed my life. I was so quiet, so shy. Yeah. And I think solo travel was kind of the thing that gave me the confidence to start breaking out of that shell.
Yeah. And it's funny because I remember before I went, so many people were just like, why would you go by yourself? Like, you're a woman in your early 20s. I remember I used to work in a pub, before I left. I used to work there while I was at uni and stuff. And then they gave me extra shifts so I could save up some more money. And, I remember one of the guys was like, oh, so you're saving up to go to South America, are you? You know, you'll come back in a box. And there was and I was just like, oh, thanks for that.
Oh, that's encouraging.
Yeah, exactly. And I think there was either that attitude, there was like the real fear of what was going to happen to me. You're not strong enough, you won't last, you'll be back after a month, And then there was well, why don't you want to be with anyone else? You know, that real like,
what's wrong with you that you have to be alone?
Or what's wrong with everybody else? Yeah. Why do you think you're too good? You know, it's like, but actually for me, I remember like a really big takeaway from it was like, yes, I went by myself, but I was never really alone. You know, I was either in nature, and you're never alone in nature, or I was meeting new people and we would travel together for a week and then say goodbye. And, you know, and there was no like hard feelings. It was just like, okay, I'm going this way. Well, I'm going that way. Bye. Thanks. You know, and it was I never really felt like I was alone, and you can be your own, you're not tied to anyone or anything, you can just please yourself. And it's so, and that's so rare, I think, to be able to just go, no, I don't like this. I remember waking up I went somewhere, similar thing. I was going to do a trek. I'd heard about this trail, got to this place, booked in, like just found a hostel and booked in. And I won't remember really distinctly waking up at 5 a.m. and going, I need to leave. And I don't know why. I just had this really strong feeling that I shouldn't be there. So I left and I went somewhere else. And even to this day, I'm like, why did I leave? But it was such an overpowering feeling that I had to go, that I got up and I got the 6 o'clock bus and I went somewhere. I went to the next place. And it's just like, but those things, if I'd have had someone traveling with me, maybe I wouldn't have felt like that in the first place, but also I would then have to have justified it to them and got them,
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it's quite an underrated thing.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. So we're here to talk today about creative blocks and nature. How do you express your creativity in the world? Like, what is your form of creative expression?
I think,
or forms?
Yeah, I think my biggest thing has always been communication, like just being able to communicate in some way. My biggest thing has always been writing. I've always loved writing. I've always been a writer. But I've never really taken it seriously. It's just something I did. Whether it was journaling or writing poems or like, writing stories that I've never finished. That's been, I like drawing and that kind of thing, but I don't do it enough. I should do it more, but the writing aspect of it has always been my thing. And I think, like, I still have books from, when I was, I don't know, 8 and upwards, I guess, of like really rubbish poems, that you write when you're like 11 years old. And
oh, that's lovely.
And then I went through my kind of slightly gothic stage when I was in my teens, and everything was about black roses and, all that sort of thing. But writing has always been, it's just always been my first love, I think.
Mine too.
Yeah.
Oh, so what are creative blocks? Is this like writer's block, or?
I think creative blocks is just when it's when whatever it is that you're trying to do creatively, it's like you can't see a way forward in it. For me, that's what a creative block is. And it doesn't, I feel, for me, I don't have to be creating something in order to get a creative block. Sometimes for me, the creative block comes before I've even put pen to paper. And it's like this physical, I can't even start it because sometimes it's because I don't know where or how to start it. And sometimes it's because I'm actually scared of the outcome being rubbish. It's like, it's that whole, almost like that self-fulfilling prophecy, I guess, in a way of like, well, I know it's going to be rubbish, so I'm not even going to bother because it will just be rubbish. And then the block continues, And I think it's similar. Well, writer's block, I think, is a form of creative block because it's, a lot of people will talk about getting writer's block when they're halfway through something, that they'll hit a wall in whatever it is that they're doing. But for me, it's very much about something blocking that flow. And often, most of the time, it's something that's literally could just be removed. It's like if you think about a water pipe, if you shove something in the middle of it, or you, like a hose pipe, if you twist it, it'll cause a block and then the water won't be able to flow. But if you untwist it, you figure out how to untwist it, it'll continue to flow and then, it all comes back. But that's very much how it looks for me in my head of what a creative block is. It's like, no.
And how can people tell when they're blocked? Like, how can they know that that's what's going on for them?
Well, I think obviously it depends on the person, but for me, it's very much about a lack of I mean, I suppose there can be different ways that they can kind of manifest in people. Lack of motivation. So I just can't even be bothered to start. I can't be bothered to continue. I just, no, I can't be bothered. Procrastination, finding something else to do. That's such a big thing of like, I'm not really sure where I'm going with this, so I'll just do something else. And then the thing you're supposed to be doing never gets finished because you're always doing something else. Feeling quite unsettled, I think, like tetchy. And often I think, well, for me, that comes from a frustration that I know I want to continue to do whatever it is I'm doing or create whatever it is I'm creating. But because I feel blocked, I get frustrated and then I just get a bit like unsettled, like can't sit still. Just can't find that calm that I think you need in order to just kind of almost like accept that the block is there and move through it.
Yeah.
And then just like I said, not even wanting to start and actually being scared of a blank page. So looking at a blank page and just when you just get really overwhelmed with all of if someone's asked you to write something, the expectation of what you think they're looking for, the expectation of what you think they think it's going to be because they've asked you to do it, and the blank page can be really like quite overwhelming. And I know people who, this sort of, I don't know what it's called like formally, but this kind of creative journaling where, you use pictures and it's kind of mixed media. And some people will actually paint on their page, almost like a canvas. They'll paint on their page first so that there's no blank page. It's just, it's got something on it already and then they're just creating on the top of it. But I think that can be a big thing, is just that. I know for me, like I say, that's a really big thing of, I'm not sure I'm going to like what's there when I've finished it. But actually I think what comes with that is just accepting, like I've been really, recently, especially because I've been trying to reach out more with my writing, as in like write pitches for magazines and kind of put more stuff on my website, because I've always kind of hidden my writing. So I'm trying to be a bit more out there. Yeah. And I think one of the big things for me has actually been removing the pressure of the final product, and in the sense of saying this is just a draft, like just allowing the draft to be. And actually I love writing by hand, so quite often if I am drafting something, I'll go very old school, like I used to when I was writing essays at school. I would write everything by hand. And then, when I was at school, we didn't write essays on computers at all, really. It was only really when I went to uni that I started writing on a computer. And then it's like, it's a draft because it's not on the computer. I think once I put it on the computer, it feels like it needs to be polished and final.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But when it's in a notebook, I can scribble all over it if I need to.
Oh, I like that. I think that's a really good technique. So what are your top tips for how people can work through their creative blocks, whether that's getting outdoors into nature or other things?
I think if it's possible, identifying what the cause is, whether it's like comparisonitis, like you're worried that somebody else's is going to be better or that yours isn't going to be as good as somebody else's. I think, and there can be things like, are you too busy? Are you tired? Are you too distracted? Do you have the radio on? Have you got the TV on? Is, something happening in the background while you're trying to create whatever it is you're trying to create? Is there a deadline that you're stressing about? I think once you've identified the cause, you can then remove those things or at least try and work on those things. I think the biggest thing in terms of working through a block and like giving people tips for working through blocks is almost like the accepting that the block is there in the first place. When you just go, you know what, I just feel really, I just can't carry on with this at the moment. I don't know what it is. I haven't figured that out. I just know I need a bit of space from it. And then taking that space if you need to, going outside, having a bath, going for a run, going for a bike ride, or whatever it is that you do to kind of switch off a little bit, doing that. And then setting up, so like creating a scenario in which whatever it is you're working on can be created. So turning the TV or the radio off, because I love listening to podcasts and radios and the radio and music especially. But actually, when I'm in that mode of I want to work on this, not finish it, I just want to work on this, everything has to be off. I need to be in my little space with my computer or my notebook, and I just need to get it down without that distraction. Yeah. So I think having minimal distractions is really, really important. And then, like I said, just allowing whatever it is you're writing to be a draft. And if it ends up not being a draft, that's great. But I think having that pressure of this has to be the final piece and it has to be perfect, that's enough to cause perfectionism is like, that's enough to give anyone a block.
Yeah.
So I think just taking that, like, this is my first draft. Some of it's not going to be right. So I might even take out entire chunks. I might take out a whole paragraph. I might have to reword a few phrases. That's fine. I'm going in with that expectation and then kind of working from there. Turning off the phone.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, yeah, that's the biggest thing. Or even just the alerts. Because even if you look at your phone and just to look at the time, someone's WhatsApped me, because it's on silent. Oh, well, just quickly check that. No, just
don't.
Exactly, just don't. And also, I think experimenting with a different medium. So if you're finding yourself, I often say and I often find with myself, if I really can't write something, I'll just do something else that's also creative. So maybe I'll just do a doodle, or I'll even on my Instagram, I do my little bullet journal things. I'll even write one of those. It's like, do you know what? I'm just it's still creative, but it's in a different way. Or, so working with a different medium that's not the one that you normally work with. I think
that makes sense.
And becoming inspired in a different way.
So you mentioned getting outdoors into nature to help with creative blocks, whether it's running or cycling. Do you feel like getting outdoors into nature and moving is what helps us move through those creative blocks? Or do you think maybe also meditating in nature or being still, would that work as well?
I think it kind of depends on the person. Because I run outdoor retreats locally, and I tend to do I've been finding a lot of people that have been coming on the retreats are people who will say, I used to really love writing and now I don't do it anymore. And now I don't know how to start because I'm too X, Y, or Z, or painting or whatever it is. Like someone came to my last one and she brought her watercolors with her. And I find that different people will need different things. So I kind of do all of them. I think the main things, which is really lovely to do, is going for a walk in your favorite outdoor space, preferably kind of wild-ish, like a forest or, by the sea if you've got the sea nearby, and walking very, very slowly. So one of the things that we start off with when I run the retreats is we do a ridiculously slow walk to the shelter where everything takes place. So we go from the entrance. It's actually only a 5-minute walk from the entrance to the shelter, but we do this big looping walk and we do it super slowly. And everyone has to keep their space in the line that we're walking in. And and it takes us about 25 minutes. And I find that the biggest thing is that you hit that barrier of, I have to walk fast now. Like you're walking so slowly that something in you's like, okay, and now we need to start walking faster. We're going to start walking faster, aren't we? And I say to participants before we even walk, I say, you're going to hit that point and it'll be in about 5 minutes. But we're just going to keep walking at that slow pace. And because they're following someone who's walking at a very slow pace, they have to. And and that's almost the block. I feel like that's almost it has to be finished now. We're finished now, aren't we? But actually staying with that pace. Mm-hmm. And also wherever you go for a walk, allowing the time to let everything drop. Because I think often it's like, I'm going to go for a walk now. And we just walk for a bit. We go on our phones, or we're thinking about whatever, and we don't necessarily give ourselves that time to really drop into the body and out of the mind. And actually, I think that particularly this year, that's what helped me, was I would put the kids to bed and then I'd say to my partner, right, I'm going to go for a walk now. And it would be like 8:00 at night, and I'd go and walk. If I walk in a very direct route, it'll take me like 15 minutes to get to the South Downs. And I'll take that first 15, 20 minutes as just, everything's just moving around in my head. That's fine. And then after that, that's my just being in nature. And it's almost like, if you are feeling blocked and you want to get outside and use nature as like an ally, you have to allow yourself to have that first chunk of time, whether it's 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 20 minutes, whatever, to let the mind just chatter at you. It's like, and that's how, when I teach meditation, that's how I teach it. Your mind can't switch off. It's your survival mechanism. It's there for a reason. It wants to keep you alive. It's that ego thing, meditation is a lot about, we're going to drop the ego. We're going to get rid of the ego. Well, the ego is the thing that keeps us alive. So we need to keep a bit of it. We just don't need the negative one. We don't need the ego that tells us we're not good enough and all of that sort of thing. And so when you get out in nature, don't expect it to all happen. Don't expect that it's all just going to be like, and now it's all perfect and I can get on and write. It's actually about spending time, and allowing that kind of sense of calm to come, rather than forcing it. And I think one of the other things that I like doing, and I did this with a homeschooling group a couple of weeks ago, and I like to do it with young people in this way, because they really do struggle with walking slowly. They can't, because of just their age and the way their brains are at that time, it is all. So then it's very much about the senses and engaging with each of the senses in one, taking it one at a time. And okay, for the next 2 minutes, I'm just going to focus on what I can hear. For the next 2 minutes, I'm just going to focus on what I can smell or feel. And then you go through each of the senses, and that helps the mind to kind of slow down a little bit, and you can start to come into the breath. And then it's just then about one step, one step, one step. And then what I often find is, even if I haven't gone out for a walk to think about the thing that I'm blocked in or that I'm struggling with, when I come back, then, it might even be a day later. It's like, oh, that's what it could be. But I think the important thing is actually getting outside in the first place, making it a regular thing, and then just seeing what that does and how it helps.
Yeah, absolutely. So how do you think nature can help us to get into that creative flow?
I think just by being nature, just by being there. And, there's so much about being in an outdoor space, the colours you can, so for example, when I'm writing the prompts, like the bullet journal prompts, I'm always thinking about, how does nature feed into this? If someone were going to take this prompt and take it outside, what are the things that are around us that can help us move into that state through the blocks, whatever it might be? And it's always about the colours. The colour green is known to be calming to the nervous system. And a lot of, when we are feeling a bit kind of anxious or wound up or whatever it might be, we're in our sympathetic nervous system, and we need to drop back into that parasympathetic nervous system, which is the rest, repair, all of that lovely stuff, rather than being in fight and flight. And when you're in an outdoor space, especially if there are trees grass, whatever it might be, that green is like the first step. You know, studies show that helps the blood pressure to lower, the heart rate to lower. We start to notice the breath, you know, even if it's like if you're sitting by the beach, what I quite like to do is I'll sit by the sea, just watch the tide coming in and out. I live down in Brighton, so I'm quite lucky. I've got the beach like 5 minutes on my bike. Listen to the sea and just so it comes in, I inhale, it goes out, I exhale. It comes in, I inhale, it goes out, I exhale. And so literally just by being in nature and observing, just watching what's there, watching the birds flying and chattering to each other. And also I think there's a real reassurance. It's really reassuring seeing how the seasons keep coming and going.
Yeah.
And like I said before, getting that inspiration from nature, which is everything passes. The leaves will die and they will drop. And this block is temporary. And just by sitting, listening, feeling whatever it is that's around, that in itself is enough to move us out of the state that is the thing that's blocking us in the first place.
Yeah.
You know? Yeah.
Yeah. Nature just, it's like it completely resets my system. I mean, whether I'm going on a hike or whether I'm going on a run or a walk, like it just, it's just so relaxing, and it just completely gets me into that space where, you know, I feel like I can do anything. I can write my books. I can write, you know, podcasts. I have ideas for new podcast episodes, like, you know, tons of stuff. So it's just, it's very restorative.
Yeah. And I would also say kind of I always take a notebook with me. If I'm going for a walk, I'll take a notebook with me just in case something does come in where it's like, just quickly write that down. Yeah. And it also means I don't have to write it on my phone, which means I don't have to look at my phone.
Yes.
And I think I quite often deliberately get myself, I'm not weather bound as well. I think that's the other thing, is a lot of people think, you know, if they're feeling frustrated and blocked, it's raining, I can't go out. Well, why not? Just as, you know, what is, there was an expression which is there's no such thing as bad weather. Bad weather, it's bad clothing choices or something like that. Yeah.
I was just thinking that.
Yeah. So I think as long as you're warm and you've got a water, if you get, you know, you can buy decent waterproofs for not that much money. And just get out, because actually also I think forcing yourself out of your comfort zone, you know, is it that Wim Hof guy who, you know, the Iceman, and he says, you know, we're all too comfortable. We've all been brought up to be comfortable and to seek comfort. And I think sometimes pushing yourself out of your comfort zone is when the biggest inspiration can come in, especially if you're out in nature and it's so unpredictable. Yeah. You know, like the winds and the rain and stuff. And obviously not putting yourself in any danger. Yeah. And, you know, if you're not feeling well, obviously not going out. But even just opening the window and letting the wind come in. I love doing that. Especially down here, we get really strong winds. And just having that wind coming in and just standing by the window and just letting it come in, you know, if you can't get out of your house.
I was running a race on Saturday last weekend.
Oh, cool.
And it was just, the rain was just pouring down, and the wind was like pelting the rain in my face, and it was that rain that like hurts.
Yeah, I know.
And it was muddy, and I was like sliding all over the place, and I was like, why am I doing this? Why am I doing this? I don't have to do this. Like, this is a choice. And then I was like, but it's fun. Like, it's kind of miserable, but like also it's fun.
Yeah. And you're doing it. It's like, and I'm still doing it. Yeah, exactly. I'm not stopping. I really want to stop, but I'm not. Oh my goodness. I'm still running. And it's still raining. And I'm still, you know, it's like, oh my God, it's amazing.
It is. And it was one of those races that's like 5K loops. So you can do as many loops as you want, or as few loops as you want. You could do one loop and you'd still be a finisher. So my goal going into it was to either do 3 or 4, because I knew I could do 3, but like 4 was a stretch. And I was halfway through the 3rd one, and I was like, am I going to do the 4th one? Am I going to do the 4th one? And I was like, I'm going to do the 4th one, even if I have to walk it. And I didn't. I was able to run most of it. But like, it was a really interesting thought process of, I'm here in the elements are not being kind. but yet I'm still enjoying it. So like, let's do another loop.
Yeah, exactly. It is. So much of it is that why not?
Yeah.
Why not? Just have a go, you know?
And I was definitely outside of my comfort zone, and it definitely put me in a different place for this week. I mean, I started on Monday. I was like, getting through my emails and like doing all my stuff. I don't know. I just felt like in a different place this week because I'd had such a great kind of stretch outside of my comfort zone over the weekend.
Yeah.
So you also have a podcast. Can you tell us about it?
Yeah, so it's called Prompted by Nature, and it very much, I see that and what I do on my social media, really only Instagram because I can only manage one at a time. I see them as almost like sisters because essentially it explores the link between nature and creativity. So I interview people who work in and or with nature in a creative way. So I've interviewed nature documentary filmmakers, ecotherapists, nature writers, herbalists, just like a really broad range of people. And yeah, we talk about their work, how they're inspired by nature, and then their own creativity, how they came to do what they do, that kind of thing. And then every conversation is punctuated by a writing prompt and meditation, which I do. It's partly because I'm a meditation teacher and I'm a writing teacher, and I kind of wanted to bring those two things in. But also for me, it's about engaging more deeply with the conversations that the person might have just heard. And so using the conversations as a creative prompt. And then the meditation is part of that, dropping into that creative space and kind of trying to still the mind enough to be able to just write or paint or whatever creativity it is that they do. And also the meditations and writing prompts for me are also about like, this is a bank of meditations that anyone can access whenever they need to. And it might be that they've done a few of them and only one of them has helped them. Well, then they've got one meditation that they can listen to and go back to or memorize and then use in their daily lives. So I think, for me, that was quite an important part of it, was to actually use the conversations as a starting point, essentially, for people's creative work or life or whatever it might be.
Sounds very juicy.
I love it. I've been thinking about doing a podcast for years. I used to make mala beads, which are beads for meditation, and I did that for like 6 years. Loved it. But there was just never, in terms of like the yoga world is just very fraught at the moment, and it just didn't really interest me. And then when last year, it was kind of middle of last year, I started to think I need to get back to teaching and just being outside again, because I wasn't outside because I was working so hard making the beads. And then this sort of started to drop in, and it was like, I could post creative writing prompts linked with nature, because they're my two favorite things. And then I can do this podcast and have meditations, and it all just started to, and now I really love it.
And it's very much needed in this world.
Yeah.
And especially now that we're in this weird COVID thing, where we're coming in and out of lockdown, like it's great to have online resources that people can access without having to go to a yoga class or go to a meditation class. And I think that's going to be really supportive for a lot of people.
And I think, it's just a crazy year.
Yeah.
So anything I can do to help in any way. And I've had some really lovely feedback about it. And that's kind of gives me a nice push to keep going, because I edit it and do all of it myself, more because I just I tend to say silly things during the interview, so I don't want people to hear that, so I can edit it now.
Well, you haven't said any silly things today. It's all been really good stuff. So.
Yeah, no, I love it. And it has become part of my own creativity now. Yeah.
Excellent. So where can people find you online?
So I have my website. That's kind of the main where everything that I do is, and it's www.promptedbynature.co.uk. There's a blog that I'm kind of trying to build up, and then I put some of my own writing on there, and it's got all my events, and I've got an online, it's just like a Monday evening nature inspired. It's essentially the podcast and the Instagram account in a weekly class. So I'm starting that next week. And then my Instagram, I am on Facebook, but it's only really, I put the events on there and then I feed my Instagram into that. So I don't really have to do too much in terms of social media stuff. But most of what I do is on Instagram, and it's at prompted.by.nature. And then my podcast is just Prompted by Nature, wherever you get your podcasts.
Sounds good. Well, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for asking me. It's been really lovely.
Excellent. Well, have a great day.
Yeah, you too.
Please drop me a line and let me know what you thought of this week's episode. I hope you found it interesting and useful. You can email me at holly@hollywharton.com or find me online and get in touch there. Thank you so much for listening. Next week's episode, I think, is going to be a solo episode, but I've got some really exciting interviews coming up, so I might switch things around. We shall see. Remember to visit hollywharton.com/381 for the show notes on this episode. Thank you. Thanks so much for listening to Into the Woods with Holly Wharton. You can find more information about today's episode, including links for topics that were discussed, at hollywharton.com. That's HOLLYWORTON.com. If you'd like to connect with other listeners and get support on your journey, I would love for you to join my private community on Patreon. That's patreon.com/Holly Wharton. That's patreon.com/Holly Wharton. Thank you so much for listening, and I look forward to seeing you next week.